Welcome to the Workiz podcast, the ultimate podcast dedicated to navigating the dynamic landscape of the home service industry. Delve into the world of business strategies, innovation, and growth as we bring you insightful discussions on the latest trends, success stories, and expert advice. Alrighty, thank you so much, Lucas, for being on here. We're excited to have you with us today on the podcast. Lucas Barra is the head coach and co-founder of All In Coaching based in San Diego. With over a decade of experience, he has helped countless entrepreneurs and sales professionals grow their businesses and achieve their dream lives. Lucas's passion for personalized coaching empowers clients to overcome challenges, break free from the golden handcuffs to business ownership, and thrive. With a track record of over 3,000 closed sales and 6 years of coaching, Lucas brings valuable insights across various industries, delivering tailored solutions for each client. Outside of coaching, he enjoys long walks on the beach, philosophizing, and listening to Michelle Branch because having fun is part of the journey. Thank you for being with us, Lucas.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Super excited to be here, Caitlin.
Yeah, me too. I mean, I know I gave a brief intro, but you have over a decade of experience, in coaching and sales. So what initially inspired you to venture into the world of coaching?
I was working in sales for a very high-level management consulting company. So they put together these like CEO and business owner masterminds for groups of entrepreneurs that are already running, basically anybody running a business over $1 million in annual revenue. So already successful, established businesses. And as you may know, this is funny. As you may know, 85% of businesses in general, never make it to $1 million in annual revenue, which is crazy because I heard that stat, and when I was working for this company, I was like, wow, like 85% of people aren't making this mark. And then when I was working at the company, I got really good at getting in front of CEOs and business owners, like getting past gatekeepers. I had a methodology that I developed, and it worked so much so to the point to where they had me help hire and train people to do what I was doing. And so I recognized that there was a gap of people who really need that help, who were still in the stages of building their business. And I had gotten really into entrepreneurship and coaching while I was there. So I was like, I really want to do this already. And I was in a professional development. So there was this natural sort of like, want to do it. There was clearly a market. And then I thought, well, I ask a lot of questions. Like I'm naturally a pretty curious person already. Like I think I'd be a good coach. And so I just said, screw it. And I just started doing it on the side. And I had like a few people I worked with for free. I asked them for testimonials. If I helped them, I helped them. And they gave me testimonials. And then I literally eventually started charging people like $35 an hour. Like I was working for nothing to start so I could just build my credibility. And then it started to like go a little bit, and I was working 7 days a week for this company. And so I was doing my business, and eventually I was getting super burned out. And that's where I decided like I was going to do this full time eventually, because I just recognized like I really wanted to do it. And and eventually I just jumped into it, and that was it.
For sure. Yeah. And being like really curious is a part of being in sales too. Cause like, of course I'm in sales besides just doing the podcast.
100%.
It's so important. I know. And I used to get in like so much trouble as a kid because I'd ask so many questions, but like, I know, seriously, like I asked like too many, but like, it's a good thing, right? It's a good thing to be curious. And that's what makes you a good coach too. I'm curious, like with that too, like how has your journey evolved over the years?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's evolved a lot because I think initially it was about me when I started. Even though I had the intent to help other people, I was so in my head about needing things to be a certain way. And now it's evolved to more being of service and like actually like it not being about me and like what I get. And so my journey is a lot more about now has evolved to a place to where it's more about finding the right people who want the help, which is so key for any salesperson, right? And then it's more, and the business has evolved too now because I don't work with everybody I talk to, and before I would take anybody who, with a pulse, and now I've learned to not do that. So it's evolved to where it's less about me, more about them and their growth, and really seeing my own value, because even though I'm a coach, like I've had my own struggles with seeing my value, and that has evolved like along with the business is now not just sales coaching. It's more of a holistic coaching business to help people with, who are just starting off in sales all the way growing like a full blown team, and how to do that. So it's evolved. I never would have thought it would be here when I started, but that's the whole point, right?
That's amazing though. And I'm curious because, I think it's such a good thing to know like your worth, and know who you should work with and who you shouldn't. So I'm curious, like what have, like for other people who are in a similar position to you and wanting to coach other people and mentor, like what were the determining factors for the people you do decide to coach now?
There's a few things, right? Do I like them? I mean, that's a big part of it, right? Like, can I actually have a conversation with them, or am I going to just be like banging my head against the wall if I feel like I'm talking to them? So it's do I like them? Do they listen to me, right? Because like if someone's not willing to take my advice very early on and I'm having to fight them, then it's not going to be a fun relationship. It's not going to really go anywhere. I also look at something like, well, is this something I can actually help them with? Right? Because like everybody has problems with everything. I mean, we're humans, right? There's problems with everything, right? So I evaluate whether it's a problem I can help them with, and is it a problem I want to help them with? Because I don't, for me, right? I don't want to help somebody with exiting their business. I had a client who I helped from more of a mindset perspective, but the actual planning side of that, please keep me away from that as much as possible. So I just look at it like, is it something that I also would want to work through as well, and in terms of the challenge? And then the last thing that I look at in terms of the relationship is, do I feel like this is someone who actually wants to grow? Right? Because a lot of people say that they want to grow, but are they saying things that actually indicate like that they want to, like they're actually willing to do the work? Like for me, I have my clients fill out surveys, or like, are they saying I want to grow? Sure. Like that sounds nice. Or are they saying like, yes, I actually want to grow? Like there's a very big distinction between somebody who says, sure, I want to grow, and yes, like I really want to grow right now. And like those are big distinctions for anybody in sales, right? Anybody who's selling a service, you have to really listen for those things. So that's how I distinguish it.
Yeah, for sure. Like knowing who's going to put in that work with you and work with you rather than against you totally makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
With the coaching industry, I'd love to hear like what gaps you've identified.
Mindset is for sure a big gap in the coaching industry. There's meaning like a lot of times like coaches will tell somebody like they need to like block out their calendar to make sales calls, right? And then the real problem is that they have fears about changing the way that they do things, because they're used to being able to do whatever they want to do, but now they have to be more disciplined, right? Like I had a client who's afraid of being more disciplined because he's used to just being able to do whatever he wants, and we had to talk about shifting that. So a lot of times that's like there's a big gap where a lot of people would just tell people what to do rather than getting to the bottom of it. So that's one big gap that I've seen in the coaching industry. And then another one is the personalization aspect, where people will just say, hey, you need to do this, this, and this, and this, and this, and then you'll have success. But they don't take into account the actual person, right? Like, how does that person like to be communicated to? Are they a visual person? Are they a person who's motivated by negativity, positivity? Are they kind of person, like what have been their past experiences, right? All those things to really understand, like, who am I working with? Rather than just being, and I hear this frustration all the time with people to be like, with very high level people will be like, I'm telling them what to do, but they just don't know how to coach them. So that's a big gap. Is like the personalization is also a big gap. And then the last thing is more of the experiential aspect of it, where like a lot of people will teach tips and tactics, but they don't actually show them how to do it. So what I mean by that is like someone will say, this is how you get past the gatekeeper. or this is how you do this, right? And so, but they don't show them how to do it. They don't see the other person like actually scheduling the call with the gatekeeper or like the coach getting rejected. And that's something I do with my clients. I'm like literally will make sales call. Like they watch me get rejected. They watch me like go through the same stuff that they do. So it helps them to see like, okay, he's not just like talking. And then it helps them from like they're able to see things to where it's not just see things that they can apply that helps them. And a lot of coaching is not experiential. It just is talking when people need application.
I love that though. I think it shows like how personal you make your coaching. And on that note too, for all in coaching, it's one-on-one coaching, all personalized, as you can tell by talking about it there too. Why do you believe a tailored approach though is crucial for business success?
Because you have to. I mean, you can't. There's no such thing as a one size fits all. Like people are not one size fits all. Like you can give them some things that will help, but the results are always going to be limited if there isn't some level of personalization to help the person or the group that you're working with.
I'm curious too, because like knowing that each person is different, we're all unique in our own ways too. How do you ensure that each client's needs are met?
Well, so I talk to them about their needs, right? Like I ask them, how do you want to be communicated to? I ask them like, how do you want to be accountable? Right. And I listen to their answers and they may tell me, well, like, I really hate negativity. Like I need positive reinforcement, right? Or versus it might be the complete opposite way. I ask them how they learn. I've asked them like what their experience has been working with other coaches. What did they like? What didn't they like? So I can understand like based on the experiences that they've had before, like what do I need to do to adapt that situation to their situation? And then I have them take personality tests and surveys so I can understand beyond just like the surveys ask, how are you closing deals? How are you generating referrals? So I can see in their words, like what they say beyond just what I confirm with my own eyes and my ears. And then I reconfirm that with them. So there's a process that I use that helps us to figure that out.
I love that though. I think it's so important to understand like who you're working with, right? Because like each person, like I think back to like, and I don't know why I keep going back to when I was young, but like to like third grade when I took the test of like the verbal or kinesthetic learner, like what kind of learner are you? And it sounds like, you take it to the nth degree of that, which is awesome though too. It's a great way to look at that too.
Yes.
Shows how valuable you are in this space.
Right.
You've also been involved, in over 3,000 closed sales and have coached professionals across various industries. What are some common challenges that you've seen with them?
Yeah, I mean, like one of them is like, mindset, right? It's like one of the common challenges I see is like people believing in themselves. I mean, that's a common challenge. Another common challenge is like fear of rejection, right? People who, whether it's with themselves or the people that they're calling on, or they don't think that they're worthy of the size of the account. That's like a very common challenge. Not enough time in the day is very like I talk to a lot of people who don't have the time in the day to like do something, but they need to find the way or find a different way to get around doing it, and I help them with that. So that's one thing that I see a lot. And then another common challenge is just dealing with the ups and downs of just like being an entrepreneur. I mean, dealing with like this idea of like detaching from results, right? Because we expect things to be a certain way, or like this year, service industry has been crazy. So a lot of people I like expected things to be a certain way, and they've gone the complete opposite, right? So a lot of my work is getting people to help with that. So it's that's a challenge that I see, and then it's also just approaching things that they know that they need to do, but they can't get themselves to do, or new tactics, right? It's like I know I need to do, I can't get myself to do it. I just can't I'm getting stuck in my own way on this. Like, what do I, and that's where the coaching comes into play.
I love that. And I think that there's a few things that so many people who are listening can relate to too. Like fear of rejection is huge. We see that both in personal life as well as in professional life too. It's going to always bleed into each other, right? But I'm curious on your end for like specifically people who might be operating on that fear. Like, how do you help them with that side?
Yeah, well, I mean, it starts with getting to the root of the fear, right? Like that's the key, is like where the fear start from. Like why do you have that fear of rejection? And for some people, it goes really deep, right? Like mine came from getting rejected by girls in high school. Like I reject, like a fear of like a deep fear of rejection that came from an experience that I had in high school. So it's, because a lot of that stuff goes way deeper than just like, oh, I'm afraid of somebody on a phone call. It's like, no, it's not just you're afraid of somebody on a phone call. It's you're afraid of what happened to you when you were in high school, when, you know, the girl that you asked out, like, ran away from you. Like, that's like what you're afraid of, right? Like, that's the real thing. So it's A, like getting to the root of like where the fear is coming from. And then B, it's turning around, basically doing one of two things. It's either seeing a new perspective of like what that fear meant in the moment, right? Like, so for me, that was a really deep belief. So I went through like having to actually like, I had to like cry it out and like see it from like a different perspective, because there's certain like things that were deeper in there that I had to be like, well, it didn't mean I was not enough. It just meant like that in that moment in time, like it wasn't meant to be, right? So I had to get to a point where like I allowed that. And then I have to change my perspective. So, for example, I had to change my belief and be like, no, the rejection didn't mean anything about me. It just meant like either A, it wasn't a good situation for me, or B, like it just wasn't the right fit. And that was it. And like you have to keep reinforcing that to yourself, because you have to have what is called the better belief and then an action, right? Like an action to actually reinforce this belief. So like, for example, the next time that I have that fear of rejection, or you have that fear of rejection, you tell yourself that belief and then you make the call. Like you make that call that's scaring you anyways, because you're starting to demonstrate it's like, well, I'm not going to worry about someone running away from me or a prospect not getting back to me. I'm going to make that call anyways. And then you do it, and it starts to cement what you just talked about. Because if there's no action to actually support what we just talked about, you go through the cycle of just same thing, which is chanting a bunch of affirmations and nothing actually happens, which is a problem in my industry. So that's why you have to have the action to back it up.
Yeah, I appreciate the vulnerability. Wow, that's a hard word. I'll say it again. I appreciate the vulnerability there too. You know, I think that it's so important to like be able to look at yourself and know like maybe where that fear is coming from, and like you mentioned, like diving deep in that. So I'm curious for people like who may have that fear to call, right? And they're afraid of that. How do you get them to start thinking deeper? Because I think that for me, at least, that wouldn't be like the first thing I think of is like, is this like, what fear am I basing off of?
Yeah, I mean, so like the first thing I do to get them to start thinking deeper is like, I ask them like, how often do you spend time thinking about these sort of things in the first place? Just to kind of get a feel for like how much reflection are they doing at all? Because if they're not doing any reflection, it's like totally makes sense. And then the follow up to that is, are you nervous about the action? Are you nervous about the reflection? Because a lot of people are nervous to just be like, I don't know if I want to see this. Mm-hmm. And that's always is a coaching moment, but it's also an opportunity, because if you don't do the reflection, then you're going to still be in the same place, and there's always opportunity and stuff like that. So it's stopping and you know, just giving yourself the practice to sort of just start to try to see those things, and then you just start asking yourself more questions, right? Like it's like, you know, ask yourself, well, why did I do that? Right? It's like, or where did that come from? Because if you're not used to the process of reflection, if you just start naturally asking yourself more questions, it's kind of like in sales, right? Where the better questions you ask, the better results you're going to get. So the more that you practice asking the questions, the better your questions are going to get. So it's not, you know, don't start off with the idea of, you heard me talk about a really deep limiting belief. do not start off with that objection. It's just try to find something. Like, what's the first thing that comes to your mind? Be like, well, what's the reason I am scared? What's literally the first thing that just came to your mind? Attached to that, right? And then you keep asking yourself a question, because there's stuff that and this is going to sound funny, but like, there's stuff I've known the first time and I thought was the fear, and it took me literally 3 or 4 years until it came full circle, and I was like, oh, that was the connection between that initial question, right? So that starts with that. It starts with like, that's a way to start the process.
100%. And it's like sometimes hard to connect the dots when you're like visioned in the moment too. So it's I like how that you mentioned like asking yourself those questions is so important. Like when you feel that emotion coming on, right? Because you're going to be able to know yourself more in those moments too. That definitely contributes, to what we're talking about mainly here is mindset seems to be really a critical component of your coaching philosophy. So, I mean, I'd love to hear, besides just, asking yourself questions here too, how else can you help develop like a winning mindset?
I would say it's like, for example, you'll hear me talk about this in a little bit, but it's establishing a relationship with yourself, that you're the kind of person who follows through no matter what, right? I mean, like, that's a huge part, because if you can't count on you to follow through and stuff, who's going to count on you, right? And like, that's why, like, for example, right, on the days where I've literally, like, I've gone weeks where like I've slept like 10 hours in the whole week, right? But that's something that I chalk up to myself. I say, hey, I got up and I did the workout. I did the calls. Like, I did all the things that I said I was going to do, because it's building up that resume with myself, right? And if I have that resume with myself, it's much easier for me to do what to have that confidence in the moment in time, and for other, because they're gonna know just by the way I come across it. Hey, here's a person who's going to show up no matter what, right? So like that's a big part of that philosophy, and within that is this component of like doing what's hard, right? Like I always, like for me, like I always make the hardest sales call I have to make first. Always, like the call I hate the most always goes first. And I still don't like now I'm at a point where I'm like, all right, I welcome it. But when I was younger, and there's still times where I'm like, I really don't want to do this. I really don't want to do this. But the more that I do that, the easier it is for me to keep it builds that momentum of like doing what you need to do. And then the last part, from just like a philosophical standpoint for me that I think about is, am I finishing what I started? Because in some cases, like there will be times where like I'm literally like, I have a goal every day for how many sales calls I'm going to make, right? Where I literally have no desire to make another 20 calls. None. Like everybody said no, like nothing is going well. My lunch sucked, like all these other things, right? But the idea is like, if I know I'm going to, because sales is all about closing. That's why this philosophy of finishing is all about closing things out. So if I get myself and say, okay, I'm going to make these 20 calls and I know I'm going to do it, it's very similar to what I was talking about, where like, I'm going to finish that thing. And when you know that you're going to finish it, you're not going to get, I'm going to make those 20 calls, I'm going to do that next thing. That's part of that philosophy where it's like, it sounds silly, but it's like, I'm going to take the trash. Like I told myself, I'm going to finish taking the trash out. It's those little things, those little promises, and that allows me to keep moving things forward and moving the ball forward.
Yeah, I love that. It's building the trust with yourself, or you said building the resume. It's huge.
100%.
Yeah, and I definitely, there's days where I don't. Like I'll tell myself, I'm going to get all my dishes done. I'm going to take all the trash out. And then I don't do it, and I don't feel great about myself. And then when I do all the things I told myself I was planning to do, then I feel great about myself. So it's all about the internal headspace and building that resume with yourself. I totally understand where you're coming from with that too.
Yeah, well, it's also just about like, there are days where you're not going to do any of that stuff, and it doesn't make you any less of a person. It just makes you, that's really where because everybody can do it on the days where you're doing all the dishes, and it's like, but what do you do when it gets worse, right? Like that's the real mile marker.
Mm-hmm. And knowing that balance with it too.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Totally understand. Many business owners also struggle, with feeling trapped by their businesses, or you put it, the golden handcuffs as well. How do you help them break free and achieve the life they've always wanted?
Well, it's first admitting it, right? Because a lot of people don't like, they have to get to a point to admit to where they want the handcuffs off. That's a big part. Like, a lot of times people don't, they have to get to enough pain where they're like, I don't want to do it like this anymore. And some people, that takes time. Like, that will take, there will be times where somebody who comes to me wanting the handcuffs off, but they're not really ready. They'll say they're ready. They talk about they're ready to sign the contract, but it takes us some time to get to the bottom of what is really holding them back from like actually letting go of the handcuffs. And then so it's admitting it is step one. And then step two is like, what do you want on the other side of that handcuffs? Because for a lot of people, it's that not knowing of what is, like, for a lot of business owners, one of the biggest things is like, well, what do I really want now? Because you got this business to a certain level, but it's handcuffed to you that way. So you're scared to look at, well, what's it going to be now if I change? So it's you defining and being clear on, like, well, what does my business look like without the handcuffs on, and being able to be clear on that. Because if clarity is power, right? And when I have that clarity, it's much easier for me to walk away from my current scenario and then outline what are some paths that I need to take. And then the last thing is, to get the handcuffs off, is what new habits and people do I need in my life to be able to allow the handcuffs to go off? Because for a lot of people with the handcuffs, it's you change, because you can't be the same person and get better results. It's not how it works, right? And so, for example, in my business, right, like a big change for me is like, early on in my business, I used to party a lot. I used to drink a lot. I used to go out, and then I'm not saying I'm not knocking anybody who likes to have fun, but a big part of what handcuffed me was my productivity. And once I moderated that a little bit more, it changed my business. And then that changed my relationships, because a lot of my old friends who just party all the time, I didn't hang out with them as much. And so that's why I have like a Bible study I'm a part of now. I have different things that I put in place as habits and people in my life who are more in alignment as part of keeping those handcuffs off, because that's what keeps that's part of what keeps the handcuffs off, because you need to have those new habits and people in place to support who you're becoming, because you need usually different habits and people to become that different version of yourself, and for the business too.
Yeah, 100%. And I think that's so true, though. Like, you can't expect change without change, right?
Right.
And it sounds like a lot of it comes down to the habits too, and the people, and what decisions you're making and the choices you're making.
Well,
who you're surrounding yourself.
Yeah, and sorry to interrupt you, but that goes to like delegation too, right? Because if we're talking about like getting the handcuffs off, you got to be able to know like what I do well and what I don't do well, right? Because like a lot of the ways that people handcuff themselves is they just do everything themselves. They think that that's the thing that's the number way you get handcuffed, is you don't take the time to, one of the ways, not number one, but one of the ways you don't define, say, okay, here's what I do best, and I'm only doing that. Here are some of the other things that I could be delegating out, and like really being honest with yourself. Because a lot of things, like, I used to like doing my numbers. I used to like, there's a lot of things I like, but I'm not good at. Like I'm not, I stink at that, or I shouldn't be, or just shouldn't be doing it. It's not the highest and best use of your time. And people never define that. So once you define that and you start figuring out what you can allocate and get rid of, that brings the handcuffs off for a lot of people.
I like that too. It's such a good perspective. I haven't thought about that before. Delegating. I'm going to have to think about where I can delegate in my life now too.
Yeah.
It's huge.
It's not just in your business too. It's in your personal life, right? Like I've gotten food delivery. I have food delivery. I delegate my cooking. I delegate my dry cleaning. I delegate all these things that I don't. It's like my best use of my time is, you don't want me in the kitchen. You don't want me doing your dry. I shouldn't be doing my dry cleaning. I don't have time to go to a dry cleaner for, 30 minutes out of my Monday is a lot of time for me to go to a dry cleaner. That's a lot of time. That's a lot of time for any salesperson, because your best use of your time is talking to somebody, not doing your dry cleaning and not doing your cooking in the kitchen. You're not getting paid for that.
I'm curious what happens in that kitchen.
I'll leave that a mystery.
I like that. Beyond that too, it sounds like, kitchen's not there, but obviously your success has been great as a coach, and you've brought so much success to other people. So could you share some success stories from one of your clients that highlights the impacts of like personalized coaching on their business and then personal growth as well?
Yeah. So I had a client in Spain. It was an amazing story. We've been working at it for about 6 months, and we were having this renewal conversation, and he said, well, I don't think my client service team can sell. And I was just like looking, I was like, what are you talking about, dude? Like, what do you mean your client service team can't sell? And he had this limiting belief that like they would be being too salesy if their salespeople, if their client service people were selling people. And then we talked about it, and he came to the realization that if they weren't selling upgrades, if they weren't looking at different ways to help their clients, then they would be doing them a disservice. And it was a huge, it was a huge moment, because their client service people went from being client service people to client service and sales people. And we unlocked $1 million in annual revenue, like literally, because he had a 6-person client service team at the time. So he went from literally overnight, like on that call, like they literally closed, like they sold like a $10,000 package. So they closed like 3 upgrades within like a week of that call, because I coached them on how to change it. And so it literally changed the face of their business, because they've been growing their client service team, and they're beyond like 10 people now. They're that full blown business because of that. And that was so cool to watch. Like the look in my client's eyes was just like, oh my God, I can't believe I didn't even think of it like that.
I mean, if you want $1 million increase in revenue, Lucas is your guy. That's what I'm hearing.
That's right.
I love that. I'm calling you now too. You also mentioned, the importance of like, we talked a lot about mindsets and systems and having the right habits in place to build that profitable business. What are some key habits or systems you would recommend for entrepreneurs to thrive?
So accountability scorecards are really important. So what I mean by that, it's like, even if it's just you, right? It's how many calls a day are you making? How many people are going to discovery calls? How many people are going to demo calls, right? How many of those are you losing? Because if you don't have a scorecard of, let's say, how you're performing on a day-to-day and a week-to-week basis, you can get completely blindsided by your own performance. Like if you don't set enough, you need to know, like if you're not setting enough consultations, like what is happening? Because otherwise you wake up in 2 or 3 months, and Caitlin, I don't know if you've experienced this. This is why I do this. Is because I've had times where I didn't keep score, and then all of a sudden I'm not setting meetings, and I get completely blind, think I'm doing great, and I just get, blindsided because I'm not aware of what's happening, right? And so there's that element of my own accountability to myself, and then the accountability for anybody who's building a team and a business. It's you need to be able to have people who can be accountable for themselves. So you have to have a scorecard for them to know how they're performing, that you evaluate with them on a daily and weekly basis, because you can't just expect people, even if they're high performing, to come in and manage themselves, because you need to have the numbers and the accountability of how many calls a day are they making, how many, all those little things that they're doing, so that you can coach them up in the areas that they need coaching. And then you can more readily see the gaps in terms of like where they need help with their specific performance.
No, amazing.
And then the next thing that you want to look at outside of just like scorecards, it's like you heard me talk about the delegation a little bit already, but it's figuring out like what part of your process you need to delegate, what part of the process you need to keep, and then also figuring out the bottlenecks in your sales team and within yourself. right? Because like, for example, delegation and bottlenecks are two different things. When I say a bottleneck, what I mean is someone's bottleneck to their business. Maybe they might be a really good salesperson, but they're also really good at being a contractor. Right. And unless you define that and say, what's my bottleneck with my business, it's really hard for you to know what's that next, that like, am I just trying to do too much right now, which happens to a ton of people in the service industry, where they never say, oh wait, I'm the bottleneck right now. Or the bottleneck is, because when I say bottleneck, what I mean is like, what's the limiting factor in your business right now? Because there's a limiting factor for every business, no matter what level you are, right? And the more that you can make it an exercise every month and 90 days to stop and go, okay, what's my bottleneck as part of your system right now? Is it, we're not getting back to clients fast enough? Is it that I'm taking on whatever client comes to me? Am I responding a consistent, hold on a sec, trash coming, speaking of bottlenecks. Am I overreacting to customer requests? Another common service person problem is you overreact to customer requests, right? But unless you're evaluating that and saying, what are my bottlenecks, then you don't do it. And then the last thing that you want to look at on that sort of from like a systems perspective is like what I call the standards, right? It's like, what sort of standards have you set up with your customers in your business? Like, do you tell them you're going to get back to them in 24 hours, or is it just kind of like, right? Or when you have a sales call, is it 15 minutes or is it until whenever you think it should be, right? Because a lot of people, and this is a handcuff for a lot of people, is you get into business and you like talking to people, but it's a business and you never have a standard for how long the conversation should be. And you end up wasting a lot of time, and there isn't, because when you go on like a flight, the flight attendant, the pilot never goes, well, I think we might be able to get there in 2 hours and 30 minutes. I think like they're going to go in there. They're going to tell you it's 2 hours and 30 minutes. Otherwise, most people are going nuts. But we go into our businesses and we don't operate like that. So just having those standard of expectations for how fast you get back to customers, how often you meet with the team, things like that from a systemization standpoint makes such a big difference, because there's not as much thinking, right? And when a business is growing, thinking is death. You have to be able to move without thinking. And that's why the definition on those things is so important.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, I'm writing these notes down. I'm like, okay, I learned to delegate. And where's my bottlenecks, Both in personal and professional, they both, again, coincide.
Oh, 100%.
So that's super helpful. I'm curious on your end too, when you first started All in Coaching as well, what's something that you wish you were told back when you first started it? That's a big question. I'm sorry.
No, I'm glad that my reaction is good. That's a good question. I would say I wish someone would have told me I wish someone would have told me that how prepared I need to be for other people to tell me what I don't want to hear. Like, I can't tell you how many people have told me I need to get a job. I can't tell you how many times I've been told, don't you want more peace in your life? Don't you want to be happier? I was not, people always tell you like the no and expect the things from your family and your friends. I wish someone had, I wish A, someone had told me that, and then B, had told me that I could handle it. Because it took me a long time. Like, we get advice from our parents and our friends and our families. And like, for me, I started off this journey thinking everyone knew better than Lucas. It made me a good coach, because I would defer to other people. I listened to their advice, but the last person I usually consulted, people are paying me, $100 an hour. I would not consult myself. Right. But I wish I wish I would have consulted my answers for myself earlier in the journey and embraced my answers, because it would have made my life a lot easier. And then I would not have gone to other people thinking that they were going to understand my choices. Because the spoiler alert for most people is 95% of people are not going to, especially if you're starting a business or you want to grow in just your life, not just starting a business, is most people aren't going to understand that. We live in a culture where people say that they want to grow, but most people actually don't. Right. And that's where if you go into it knowing like, hey, like I'm comfortable with my choices, I'm going to back myself up on my choices regardless of what other people say. Right. It's not to be psychotic to level of like where you just don't care about people at all, but it makes a huge difference, because then when someone is in your ear about, things are going bad for you, you don't think twice about it.
No, totally. I think that makes sense. Like knowing what you want, sticking to it, and having the confidence to stick by it then.
100%.
Yeah, I think a lot of people can relate to that too. And I think that, I can at least. I know I question myself all the time, which blessing and a curse, right? It's good to question yourself, but also to an extent, sometimes it's like, okay, Caitlin, slow your roll. You got to chill.
Right, totally.
So, I get it. A bit of a lighter note as well. You mentioned your love for Michelle Branch and long walks on the beach. I'm curious because I also live in San Diego. What's your favorite beach?
I would say like PB's, probably Pacific Beach. I would say like Crystal Pier is probably my favorite beach, and then the bay over by Faneuil Park is like not a beach, but that's probably my second favorite place.
I get you. I'm a big fan of Sunset Cliffs. I'm a sucker for it. I love all the rocks and looking at the formations. It's so cool.
That's an awesome one too.
Yeah, no, it definitely is. I'm curious for you too. It's important to keep, the balances between professional responsibilities and personal passions alive. So how do you keep that balance?
Well, I just like schedule like activities in my life that are non-negotiable that I have to do, right? Because it's very easy for me to talk myself out of doing that stuff. Then I've had to learn this over the year. Like there's a run club I go to in North Park. It's like it's non-negotiable. Like I don't care like if I want to or I want to work more, like I just go, right? So that's one way is I schedule things non-negotiable for me, and then I have what's called rails. So when I say a rail, like if I've had 3 14-hour days in a row, right? Like I know somewhere in there I'm going to need like, I know I'm mandatory giving myself like a coffee break on the 4th day. I'm giving myself a longer lunch. Or if I've worked from home, for me, I'm an extrovert. So I need like, I can work from home for about 2 days and then I got to go to an office. So I go crazy. That's a rail. So I have rails that I put in my life, where rails are a really fancy way of saying habits that I put in my life that I established that make me keep that like I do no matter what, that just keep my sanity. And the more that you notice, like I can notice, it's easy for me to go, oh, it's been 2 days of working from home. And then now I notice that, so I'm easy to get back on the rail and do what was productive for me in the first place.
I like the analogy of rails though. I think that's a cool way to put it, because like it's like having part of me thought of like bowling lane,
yes.
Like the bumpers too. Right? Like rails there, or like on the freeway, it keeps you on track.
Yes.
So I like the way you said that. It's a cool way to think about habits.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Well, awesome. Well, thank you so much, Lucas, for being on the Workiz podcast today. We so appreciate it. I learned so much. I know our viewers will as well. But thank you again. I appreciate your time.
Yeah, no, it was great being on. Thanks for having Caitlin.
Thank you for tuning into the Workiz podcast. We hope today's episode has provided valuable insights and inspiration to propel your business forward. Remember to subscribe to our podcast for more engaging discussions and expert advice on navigating the dynamic landscape of the field service industry. I hope you got to unplug a little with us. Until next time, keep innovating, growing, and delivering exceptional service. We'll see you in the next episode of Workiz Unplugged.